This is Saurabh, and you're listening to my favorite talk show, The Weekly Show with Aditya.
This is episode 215 on the 1st of June 2020. When there is the talk about resumption of sports, there are two factors to it. Factor one is the players' involvement after the fact that they have been devoid of training and any kind of activity during this lockdown period. It is important for them to regain their activity and get back on their feet. Part one of factor one is that the audience also gets to see some positive happening after everything that surrounds lockdown and the things that come out of it. The audience would want to see a sports event happening, and it is slowly beginning with the various football domestic tournaments. Part two always is the financial implications. How can one remove the finance from the sport? It is nearly impossible. Things have changed over the past 3 to 4 decades. Sports has become more than just what one would call a hobby or a passion. It is now all about money and generating patriotism, which is itself fictional. In that context, the India-Australia series becomes very important because there are two parts to it once again. Part one is the players getting back on their feet, playing the sport they are proficient in, and after a nearly 90-day period of lull, they would want to get active again. Part two, once again, is the financial implications because according to reports, if the India tour doesn't take place, the Australian Cricket Board or Cricket Australia could lose as much as 300 million Australian dollars. So according to the Indian Cricket Board officials, the India-Australia tour is more likely to happen because it is further away. Technically, we are only 130 days away, and logistically, it is easier to organize. Though this is subject to agreement by the respective boards and the governments. If the Australian Cricket Board or Cricket Australia has gone ahead and scheduled the tournament between India and Australia, what one calls a bilateral tournament between October 2020 to Jan 2021, which also includes the World Cup. Though what happens in the World Cup is an entirely different story because it is the International Cricket Board which will decide, as one calls, the fate of the World Cup, and it has deferred the decision to decide on the World Cup for another 10 days. So when that decision is made, I will bring it to my listeners. For now, let's leave logistics and the financial part to the various boards. Let's talk about if the tournament happens, what will be the implications? If my listeners, especially the listeners who follow the sport of cricket religiously, unlike me, before we talk about what happened in 2018-2019 tournament, that is the bilateral series between these two countries, and if those moments can be repeated in 2021. Let's look at how this tour was proposed and what the Australian Cricket Board or Cricket Australia had in mind while talking about scheduling this particular tournament. India are set to undertake a full tour of Australia later this year, according to the international schedule for 2020. 2020-21 summer released by Cricket Australia. The Australian Cricket Board or Cricket Australia announced the fixtures in consent with the Indian Cricket Board. Itinerary released by CA follows the 8-year FTP drawn earlier. FTP is Future Tour Programs. It had already been planned. So this all hinges around the T20 World Championship, and the decision around the T20 World Championship, as I said, has been postponed for another week. So when the 20 over World Championships fate is decided, it's still lingering. It will influence the domestic World Cup's fate, which is right now a different story. India's tour is expected to boost CA's finances. In April, the Australian Cricket Board or CA put majority of its staff on reduced pay for the remainder of the financial year. We are working closely with the Indian Cricket Board to deliver the eagerly anticipated men's and women's tours, and we are looking forward to staging the important series against both men's and women's New Zealand sides. CA CEO Kevin Roberts was quoted as saying by cricket.com.au, "We know that circumstances or events beyond our control could mean that the final schedule potentially may look different to the one released, but we'll be doing everything we can to get as much international cricket in as possible this summer. We will communicate any changes to the schedule if or when they are required." One thing learned from this schedule is that how the tourists would play cricket in Australia, which has been impacted by this pandemic, and they are working to make sure that tournaments scheduled by them planned earlier as per the FTP go on in consent with the various countries and the cricket board and the state authorities. Several theories were floated, including playing at one hub to ensure a biosecure environment, but the scheduling suggests that it wasn't endorsed. Unlike hockey and football, which can be played at one venue, means the entire tournament can be scheduled at one stadium in the same city, means all the 15 to 16 teams of that particular tournament can be in the same city, means they can be quarantined, they can be safe. Cricketing schedules hinge on the fact that they should be played on different grounds, because the theory is that every ground brings out a different environment. Unlike hockey, football, on which the turf has no influence, the cricket is influenced by external factors such as pitches, and therefore scheduling this particular bilateral tournament was always hinging on scheduling the matches on different grounds because of the emotions and the traditional factors associated with playing on each ground. The financial part also is important because the proceeds of the match go to the various state associations or counties, and therefore playing on different grounds is equally important for not just the various cricket boards, that is the boards which are run by the country which has country's name on them, such as Cricket Australia and the Indian Cricket Board, but the grounds which are run by which are independently run by various state authorities, and the money they generate out from sponsorships and ticketing and gate money. Though, according to reports, the CA's release doesn't mention if the visiting teams would be quarantined on landing in Australia. Neither does it specify if the matches will be played behind closed doors, like Australia's ODI tournament against New Zealand in Sydney in March. Roberts further went on to say that we will continue to assess whether it is possible for them to attend matches in person. However, if it is not deemed possible, we already have a solid blueprint in place. Now let's get back to this debate of what happened in the 2018-2019 test tournament versus what could happen in the 2020-2021 test tournament. When the coach said that this was a great achievement by the Indian team, this was greater than what happened in 1983 and 1985. Many purists jumped on him saying that how could he insult the efforts of individuals and what was achieved in 83 and 85. But I think the purists and the critics and the individuals who sit in air conditioned room, who have played less of the sport, whose knowledge is not well defined, for them not to digest the fact that the coach who has been with the team for over 2 years and has postulated that the effort of 2018 tournament, the effort of the players involved in the 2018-2019 tournament compared to what happened in 83-85 was greater, but that's just theoretical. What I saw on the field on my own, yes, it's an effort which has to be appreciated, but a section of purists have gone on to say that India won the 2018-2019 series purely on the fact that two of Australia's senior players, experienced players, weren't part of the team. If you remember that Warner and Smith were suspended for an action which, if the International Cricket Council has its way, they may make that particular action legal. But I have already talked about what that action is, and if you want to know more, you may refer to my earlier episodes. But here, tonight's discussion is about the 2018-2019 iconic moment. We beat Australia by a margin of 2-1. Irrespective of the fact that whether Australia had its full strength team or not, or whether they were affected by the absence of two of their senior players, if we say that that team wasn't at its full strength, then it's an insult to the individuals who played, or the individuals who were always going to be a temporary factor as far as the team is concerned. Because for these same purists and pseudo experts, the 2003-2004 test tournament was seen at a greater level because India played against a better quality Australian team. But when we talk about quality, how do you define the term quality? It's very difficult to understand the term quality. One keeps on hearing the term quality, quantity, but what is exactly quality and quantity? For me, both quality and quantity are abstract. One doesn't know one hasn't seen a quality moment or a quantitative moment. Victory or a defeat is abstract, but since it's a sport and winning and losing is part of the script, is part of the particular player's growth, living, their livelihood depends on whether as a team they win or whether they lose, or whether as a singles player they win or lose championships. This entire discussion is subjective for now. But as I said, comparing the 2003-2004 test tournament versus the 2018-2019 test tournament, is it feasible? Let's compare it just for a few reasons. But then the major difference is that 16 years ago there was no question of a 20 over tournament or a 20 over match. So they were fully focused on the test matches. They knew who their test players were, who their ODI players were. There was no divide of white ball, red ball. So the questions generated in 2003-2004 are slightly different to the questions generated in 2018-2019 and then 2020 and 2021. But the difference is that now the Indian team has a monkey on its back. They beat Australia by a considerable margin of 2-1 in the 4-match tournament. So the ball is in India's court. Will they be under pressure compared to what happened in 2018-2019? Yes, apart from the circumstances surrounding the scheduling, the quarantine of players, which is a totally different logistical issue for the various boards. The biggest question will be, will Warner and Smith's return compared to what happened in 2018 make a difference to the results of the tournament? If previous results are to go by, if you remember, once Warner and Smith returned to the Australian team, especially when they hosted Pakistan and New Zealand late last year, between November 2019 to January 2020, Warner and Smith's inclusion did make a big difference. Of course, the inclusion of Marnus Labuschagne and Joe Burns means the top 4 players of the Australian team after the events of 2018, and in the last 6 months it has been a different story. So can the Indian team repeat? Will there be a 2018 deja-vu? For me, let's take it as a 50-50 situation, because it will be a very interesting story as to how this entire thing plays out. Is the Australian team stronger because now they have a settled top 4 batters along with a couple of all-rounders as well as the fast bowlers? Will the fast bowlers be influenced by their top 4 batters? Well, it always happens in the sport that if the top 4 batters make runs, then the 4 or 5 bowlers who are a part of the team, their confidence also grows up, and this confidence and this transfer of confidence is telepathic. As I said, everything in sports is abstract. There is no physical thing that is seen. The emotions that are seen are abstract. The wins that are seen are abstract. The losses, the sad moments, the players being emotional, being joyful, everything is abstract when it comes to sports. But since sports is to be played as it is an important livelihood for the said players, it becomes an important moment for these said players. Scheduling in cricket is very different from scheduling in other sports. Sports like athletics, golf, gymnastics, hockey, football can be played on one ground on the same stadium, and if post this pandemic situation, the biosafety measures can be taken care of by the respective sporting bodies. For me, irrespective of what is happening in the non-sporting world, each and every tournament should take place, irrespective of what is happening and what decisions are being taken by the respective state authorities. As I have enumerated a million times before, in cricket, the events in different grounds are important because every ground gives out a different story. Cricket, the only sport influenced by external factors like weather conditions, ground conditions, the size of the ground. These very mitigating factors influence the result of the match and how it plays out in the minds of the players, and therefore the scheduling of the India-Australia series, even though the tournament is still 6 to 7 months away and anything is possible during this period. Things may escalate and the scheduling will have to be revised. Or if the pandemic cools down as per the experts or whoever is responsible for bringing out the news about this pandemic, if things slow down and if the various governments allow the resuming of sporting activities, more importantly, international travel as far as the travel from one country to another is concerned, as well as the inter and the intra-state travel and the biosecuring of the players. Cricket's scheduling on different grounds is important, and let's look at this from the point of view of this tournament, as this is the only official tournament announced, the only official scheduling announced with consent from both the boards. Though I am surprised that when these boards make a decision, do they take in the players' confidence or are the players just mere contractual employees of these boards and they have to live by the whims and fancies of these sporting bodies? We may call an ex-player the richest player in the world, but the money the ex-player earns in a particular sport is due to the generosity of the said sporting body, the influence of the advertisers, and other factors. A player becomes rich because they are dependent on their own capability to keep on playing for a longer duration, the influence they are able to generate among their digital fans, as the definition of fans also changes with respect to how followers are generated. So, do these boards, sporting bodies, take into confidence what the players have to say about travel, or with the players will just be happy that some event is being restored? They won't care about nitty gritties like whether they need to play in four venues or one venue or whether they have to travel, because they know that such travel concerns are now taken care of by the board. Let's get back to the four venues decided by the Australian Cricket Board or Cricket Australia. The four venues for the Test tournament are Brisbane, Adelaide, Melbourne, and Sydney. Melbourne and Sydney, by tradition and over the past 100 years, have been played post Christmas and post New Year. So those dates are unlikely to change. Whichever team comes to Australia, by tradition, by some accepted norms, and by the contract with the various state bodies, they play the Boxing Day test, that is the test post Christmas, and then they play the New Year's test. But the Brisbane situation is very amusing. Australia has put the first match as Brisbane because it has a fairy pitch, and the fact that by tradition, once again, Australia have been winning matches. They want to start the first match as at Brisbane, and if they go on to win that match, the psychological impact of the same on the said players is something that affects the rest of the tournament and how the media overreacts if hypothetically India goes on to lose. But if India defeats Australia at Brisbane, it will change the way the Indian team is looked upon. Because in 2003-2004 Test tournament, the respect for the team came about when India drew the match at Brisbane. It's a different story that it rained in Brisbane, but India did not give up, and there was a chance they could have easily won the match. By design and default, usually the second and the third matches, especially if it's a four-match tournament, means the one in Adelaide and Melbourne, the matches are decided in these grounds because over the years it has rained in Brisbane and then it has rained in Sydney. In Sydney, usually the teams make over 600 to 700 runs. It happened in 2004 when India was almost going to win the tournament, but it rained in Sydney, and then the match was saved by Steve Waugh, but that was 16 years ago. A similar situation happened in 2019 when the match was played in Sydney, but rain spoiled the chances of India winning the tournament by a 3-1 margin. So, yes, with rain influencing the result in the first match in Brisbane and the final match in Sydney, both the teams will want to secure the match in Melbourne and Adelaide. But it's too early to talk about what will happen. As I said, it is a fluid situation, it's an ongoing situation. Despite the attempt by the Australian Cricket Board or Cricket Australia and the Indian Cricket Board to schedule a tournament to keep in terms with the FTP and respect the planning they had been doing over the past 7 to 8 years. The abstract fear of the pandemic that looms in the mind of an individual or individuals or the governments will influence the final outcome of this tournament. Mitigating factors like quarantining the players, their travel requirements, the permissions from the foreign departments of both the countries, whether one country allows their players to fly out and whether the other country allows the players to step in, and then factors like thermal screening, quarantine, how much time do they need once they land in the country, the final decision around the T20 World Championship, and then the World and then the domestic World Cup replacing the said T20 World Championship. There are a lot of factors surrounding it, from the abstract fear of this pandemic to the final decisions of the governments. But the moot point of this episode was, will the return of Warner and Smith along with Marnus Labuschagne and a secure opening pair in Warner and Burns influence how Australia carries out its plan towards India, irrespective of the venue they play in? when it will not make much of a difference even if Warner and Smith are now a part of the narrative. And if pseudo experts go by the theory that after the events of the 2-1 loss to India and the return of Warner and Smith to the fold, and the fact that they beat strong teams like Pakistan and New Zealand and they whitewashed them, winning both the tournaments 5-0, it will not influence as to how they play against India. Anything can happen in 6 months' time, but looking at the logic of the entire narrative, the entire story, for me, the venues are irrelevant. I am not saying I am a fan of this team, but what I am saying is that both teams are equally poised. The inclusion of Warner and Smith does not tip the balance in the favor of Australia, nor does it put India at a compromising position that Warner and Smith's pedigree will influence as to how the Indian team plans out its strategy against various batters and how they plan their own strategy against various bowlers. Nor will a change of coach make any difference. This proves what I have been saying over the past 3 years, that when it comes to cricket, no matter how much we postulate that it's a team game and it's not about individuals, and what the coach has gone on to say on record that the reason of winning behind the 2018 tournament was that they played as a team. Cricket is always an individual sport, will remain an individual sport. It's between the bowler and the batter, while the rest of the team just wait out and play a waiting game. It will always remain a sport which is in nature individualistic, but to have some impact, they try to make it look like a team sport. It's a team sport only on paper, but in practice, cricket is and always be a individual sport because only one or two individuals have an influence, unlike other team sports. But the fact that a former football player in Bechang Bhatia has gone on record to say that with the current protocol measures in place, only cricketing activities can resume shows how pathetic the condition is of the other sporting bodies, that they are not even in a position to think about resuming activities. The football associations, the Hockey India, such boards, such sporting bodies haven't even made an effort to say that we are working hard to resume activities because India is scheduled to play a lot of hockey matches in Europe, and with the situation in Europe not being fluid and not being clear about travels, it's difficult for even the International Hockey Federation to come and say that we can start the hockey events in a manner which is secure for the officials and the players and other stakeholders involved in the conduct of the said tournaments. Hecham Bhutia has gone on to say that if the testing protocols of Bundes League and the K League are to be followed, maybe only cricket can restart given the cost involved. But then, if this is how former iconic players give out their views that they have doubts about sports like football and hockey starting, then there is nothing we can do about it, and it's all about not only the waiting game but which sporting body can afford to start a tournament, and at this point, and as we have heard at every single point, the Indian Cricket Board has been labelled as the richest sporting body in the country. So it's all about a waiting game as far as other sports are concerned. This ends episode number 215 on the 1st of June 2020.
For more awesome content, tune in to the next episode of The Weekly Show with Aditya.